Hey everyone, this is Kate from Moonflower Moments. Welcome and welcome back. Today I am continuing my 2025 Tarot Collection series, and in this video today I'm going to be exploring essentially the decks that I use to help me tap into the fire element. So when I typically think about fire has an abundance of categories that I typically associate with it, but for a short list, I typically think of fire associated with vitality, enthusiasm, creativity, spirituality, sexuality, adventure, anything that really is kind of rolling through life. But more importantly, I kind of think of fire as the element that helps us to maintain connectivity to what is beyond us. And so I believe that all of the things that I've listed before really suggest that someone is kind of either tapped into what is beyond them or has a willingness to be tapped into the greater life force that is at large. So with that being said, I want to share with you the decks that really make me feel most that way and go through specific categories of fire that I associate with those decks. So the first deck that I want to share on this list is going to be the Citadel Oracle. And this is a recent acquisition. I actually just received this from a tarot tuber. So I really appreciate the fact that she sent it to me when she was decluttering. So the Citadel Oracle is an archetypes deck that follows all of these different characters that live in a citadel or in a castle. And to me, that feels very, very innately kind of Sagittarian in a sense. We're going on a new adventure. We get to fully immerse ourselves into this entirely new world. And while we're there, we get to examine and kind of play with a variety of identities. And so through that kind of does signify that tapping into something that is beyond you, because you're able to say, you know, I am not this concrete entity. I can take on all of these different personalities at once. I can engage with all of these different personalities at once. And I think there's a sense of playfulness that is just really beautifully depicted by the energy of adventure in this deck. So this is the Citadel Oracle. All right, next I have another archetypes deck, which is going to be the Wild Unknown Pocket Archetypes. Now, if you've been on YouTube for even just like probably 10 videos, you have seen this deck. I have the pocket edition. I used to have the larger one, but I like this one a little bit more just because I have smaller hands. And once again, this is a deck that kind of refuses to abide by definition. We have the comic, at the same time we have the forest, at the same time we have the self, at the same time we have the father. And so I find it to be very much an interesting reader. Even the shape is a bit unconventional. It kind of inspires us to go on that adventure and to try something new. You know, why not have a circle deck? Why not explore with all of these different archetypes that not only represent physical locations, but objects and people as well, and places too. And so for this deck, I haven't done this yet, but I think it would be really compelling to use this deck to write a story or even engage like with short form poetry with it, just to pick a few cards and kind of get the place and the people and the objects involved. And I'm sure that it's one that other people have talked about on TarotTube using specifically for that purpose. So I haven't done it. If you've done it, I would love to see, or if you can link me to any videos where someone does it, that would be really cool. But I feel like it's just the perfect deck to hold that sense of adventure as well as that sense of creativity. So this was the Wild Unknown Pocket Archetypes deck and guidebook. So speaking of that sense of, you know, I don't want to be exactly pinned down. I kind of want to go with the flow. I want to share one of my Knight of Wands decks. And this is the Elusory Tarot. This deck is currently out of print to purchase individually, but you can purchase it in bulk orders. Just wanted to let y'all know in case y'all were interested. And when I work with this deck, I really tap into a feeling of being ungrounded. For a really long time in my life, I very closely identified with the earth side of my chart, and I still do. And so I kind of need decks like this that are a little bit strange, a little bit funky, to help me kind of open my mind up, for lack of better words, Page of Pentacles adventure. And even this in itself, like Page of Pentacles adventure, what do you mean Page of Pentacles adventure? I would typically associate that with like Page of Fire. But like the very fact that I've kind of claimed that this is like a Knight of Wands deck doesn't bother me, that sometimes the associations are like a little bit different from what I would typically pick, because I see it as the opportunity to kind of expand my mind and kind of expand into other systems or other thoughts about tarot, which in itself is really indicative of that fiery element, that willingness to kind of break from that earth and to tap into things that perhaps you don't closely hold to your heart, but others do. This deck is kind of like brainstorming, like personified. I feel like this person kind of had a lot of different ideas and they kind of threw them down onto the sheet. And I do think overall, I had such a hard time saying that. I do think overall it is a very well executed deck, but it's a little bit kooky and it's a little bit strange. And I've used it personally when I'm trying to brainstorm through problems, because there's something about using decks like this that really break you from the norm, that encourage you to see things from different perspectives and therefore get more things done in a way that really breeds momentum. So this was the Illusory Tarot. Next is another Knight of Wands deck for me, and this is going to be my Voyager Tarot. So first and foremost, I think the color palette and the overall busyness of this deck really kind of scream like artist in the midst of process. Sometimes it feels like when I'm working with this deck that there was no product in mind, but rather a lot of these images were kind of channeled as the art was created, because it is hard to kind of tell like heads from tail, you know, what should you look at first within this image. But I really appreciate it for that, in the sense of it, how it connects me to kind of the mess of being an artist. For the longest time, I wouldn't really allow myself and to associate with that kind of like mess of the process. I think even now my art tends to be like really kind of rigid and structured. Like I do like flower pressings, right? And flower pressings are very small and detailed, whereas this deck is kind of like the exact opposite. So I like to use it and to kind of reach for it in those moments where I need to remember that it's important to embrace that messiness and the craziness. I do appreciate that the courts have been renamed, so have the suits. A lot of the keywords that are associated with the minors are really not conventional at all. So for example, let's go ahead and find a minor. Keep getting quartz. Okay, we have 7 of crystals, which is dullness. 7 of crystals is the 7 of swords. So hearing it associated with dullness is very kind of abrasive, like a fire would be. So with that being said, I do kind of take pleasure and an inspiration from knowing that this is not rooted in anything that is very conventional. In that way, it is so beautiful for that brainstorming, because it's like, maybe I did pick up this deck just because I needed to hear that 10 of Wands representing growth. It might not be conventional, but like I needed this card that day to hear that. I think so this deck kind of requires you to take like a leap of kind of blind faith into it and just kind of follow wherever it's trying to take you. Because I think sometimes like your interpretations when you're working with this deck can become overwhelming so quickly, but that is the nature of fire. It does overwhelm. You just kind of have to follow it where it goes. So this was the Voyager Tarot. So in a different facet, I want to share my Tabula Mundy. And if the other decks that I've shown were more Knight of Wands, this would definitely be more King of Wands. This is definitely more of a rigid approach. So this is the only Thoth clone that I have. And I think in general, many people say that Thoth has that air of fire to it. But I'm going to throw it in with the fire element for me, because this deck to me feels deeply, deeply spiritual. It is deeply esoteric. And when I think of fire trying to tap me into the life force that is beyond, all of these cards have clearly depicted the deacons. The guidebook is an absolute treasure trove of information, where you can get lost going from like one different subject point to another different subject point. And so I think in its essence of just kind of being a very spiritual deck. This is not a deck that you go to and you ask, you know, is my card going to break down today? You know, like, what are the odds of my card breaking down today? I wouldn't use Tabula Mundy for that, but I would use Tabula Mundy to contemplate the purpose of the universe. And if I believe in something that's larger than myself, say, for example, what is the purpose of humans in general? And I think this is a deck that can handle some of those larger questions. The guidebook is written for those larger spiritual ideas as well. And so, like I said, I appreciate this deck for that blend and the role that it plays in my collection. So this was Tabula Mundy. Haven't used this deck for a long time, I'm not gonna lie. It used to be a deck that I used all the time. It's been probably over a year since I have pulled it out, but I think it's time for it to come back out for a play. I don't think our journey is quite done yet. All right, next I have another deck that's a little bit of like a one-off. And y'all bear with me here. Hopefully we're 10 minutes in, so you know that I'm a little bit strange by this point. I want to share with y'all my Symbolic Soul Tarot, which is a Lo Scarabeo deck. I love a Lo Scarabeo deck. I'm a huge fan of them. I love their quirkiness. So I really heavily associate this deck quite a bit with a part of fire that I have to share. So I associate this deck with sex, absolutely. This is a deck that when I've had clients come to me with issues in relation to intimacy, but especially of the physical kind, I found this deck to be the appropriate reader for that. There are a lot of phallic shapes that are like hidden into this deck. I've talked about it before in some of my other readings and some of my other videos in which I've featured it. So we'll just happen to see if something pops up and catches my eye as we go. And I do think that it's going to be embarrassing if I can't find anything and I've said it. Y'all are going to think I'm a perv if I can't find it. So while this is not like directly phallic, like her chest is definitely kind of like overemphasized. A lot of times the female characters in particular, and I'll look for them, have that sense of overemphasis. We definitely have like a phallic situation kind of going on right here. I won't spend like too much like time like focusing on that. But anyway, hopefully that's not too crass for you. I do think that, like I said, this is a part of life. This is a part of life people have questions about. And so it makes sense to have decks that kind of teeter in this arena. So I don't know if other people use this deck for that purpose, but this is a deck that when I have a client that comes to me and says, hey, I'm having issues with this, which happens more than what you would expect, I've pulled out this deck for them and been able to give some pretty appropriate readings. So this is Symbolic Soul Tarot. And hopefully I didn't lose y'all too much there. All right, next I'm going to hit on Wall of Radiance. Oh shoot, I promised myself I was gonna say it right in this video, but I didn't. This is Radiant Wilds. I will be producing my top 10 list pretty soon, and this is 100% on that top 10 list. There's no way to deny it. This deck and I have a very close connection. I would consider this to be one of my soul decks. And I think this deck was really formative in my experiences last year of learning to be a woman who uses her own voice, whether that be for creativity because of the color palette or just the basic premise of strength. Like, look how strong this woman looks. So it is primarily a female prevalent deck, though it does feature some like masculine bending characters. The large majority of this deck is like feminine led. And I really appreciate the kind of unique depiction. So this is Six of Wands. I can totally see Six of Wands there. And I think with the fire element representing creativity, it's nice to see something that is kind of beyond what is a traditional association or depiction. So this is one that has kind of walked with me through all stages of finding that voice. It was the precursor to the next deck that I'm about to show, because this deck, I think in particular, is that Queen of Wands, that deck that wants to express herself, the deck that wants to get out there and go, the deck that is very social, the deck that believes that she has a voice. And so I greatly cherish this deck so much. I'm not going to give away too much in the narration because I got to save something for my top 10 decks, but here are the backs. That was Radiant Wilds. Just a massive love in my heart. Another deck that is helping me along that arc, along that journey, is going to be my Enchanted for Hawka Tarot. And this deck is very new to my collection. I've not gotten the opportunity to read with it very much yet, but it's a deck when I opened up the box, I could feel the feralness of the individuals that are in it. So whereas the Radiant Wilds has like a little bit cleaner of artwork, it's not collage, it's more kind of clear cut. This deck really kind of embraces the wildness. It's like a Queen of Wands deck, but she's living in a garden. And so I greatly appreciate where this is fitting into my life right now, because I think that these are women who, similar to the Radiant Wilds women, these were women who know themselves and kind of know their role within this world. They feel a little bit older to me. It's not quite as young of a deck as Radiant Wilds is. And I think that's appropriate for me to work with this deck as I kind of step into what does that cultivated fire energy mean for me? What kind of leadership roles can I take on? What areas of my life do I need to infuse with vitality? But there's a deep sense of kind of responsibility here in terms of how am I going to use that fire responsibly? So this was the Enchanted for Hawka Tarot. And while the last two decks definitely have a feminine fire energy to me, this one definitely edges a little bit more on the masculine fire. So this is the Aztec Tarot. So I associate it with the fire element in particular because once again, we are kind of going on an adventure. You're getting to experience a different culture when you're working with this deck. And I think that that's a very valuable thing to experience. You don't want to get stuck into a rut where you are just reiterating your own points of view, your own beliefs about the tarot. And so there is that element to me of getting to go on an adventure with this deck. But another reason it feels like a fiery deck to me is because it feels like ambition personified. I don't know what it is about this deck, but it's a deck that helps me to like very clearly say, okay, here's my goal. This is how I'm going to reach my goal. So I appreciate the way that this deck and the ways that I've used it has helped me to set goals. I got this deck early on when I first started my tarot channel. And this was one of the formative decks in trying to decide like, what the hell am I doing in this space? So it is a clear reader, but to me, it's kind of gritty. Like, even though it's kind of contrasting to say this, it feels like if Capricorn was a fire sign, that's what this deck would be. There we go. So this was the Aztec Tarot, one of my favorites. It has excellent cardstock. I really love the cardstock on this one. Another deck that has really been helping me to tap into that sense of ambition is going to be my Wild Whispers Oracle. This is from the same creator who created Radiant Wilds. See, I said it right that time. I remembered the second time. And I think from just the color palette alone, like it absolutely screams fire. We have all of these rich reds, lots of yellows, lots of pinks. I love the color. I love the keyword renewal in particular for fire because it oftentimes is associated with that purification for me. But I've paired this deck with Tarot for Creativity, which is a book you use that has prompts that are associated with every tarot card. So for example, Eight of Swords, it has a tarot prompt, like a spread such as what is limiting your creativity? And then you pull a card to complete the spread that was inspired by a particular tarot card. And I've used this deck with that in very successful ways. Because I feel like words like intent and volume, freedom, these are all words that really align very well to the production and the process of the creative process. Courage, expression. And I think when I saw that, I couldn't really unsee that this was going to be a deck that I used for that purpose. Play, I love that. Magic, I love that. So this was the Wild Whispers Oracle. Next, I want to get into my last section of decks, which really kind of represents the element of play and vitality and youthfulness that feels like the fire suit to me. So this is the Moon Baby Tarot, and even just from the edges right here, that is very, very fun and vibrant. So this is a newer deck to my collection, but I found it to be an incredibly uplifting reader. So if we go back to my definition of the fire element in general, I think the fire element is one that helps us to remain tapped into a greater life force. And there's something about these bright colors that deeply reminds me of a sense of optimism. It makes me feel very optimistic. And I think that at the end of the day, it does take optimism to tap into that life force, to have the energy, to have the willingness, but also to have the resolve to see the point of tapping into that. And so this deck, I think, perfectly aligns with that well. This is bright, this is sunny, this is happiness, this is joy. This is a deck that screams affirmative to me. It wants to say yes, it doesn't want to say no. And so I think that there is a sweetness that's associated with this that is kind of like that innocent playfulness and optimism that like what a young child would bring to the table. And considering the fact that this was a recreation of a child's deck, I think that totally makes sense. So this was the Moon Baby Tarot. Like, I love its little bag. I don't oftentimes show y'all bag matches, but I just love its little bag. It's like really soft and sweet. All right, next I have a super treasure deck in my collection, which is going to be the JK Tarot or the Jupiter King Tarot. This is a crowd favorite when I'm reading for people that are in their late teens. I don't know how, I don't necessarily advertise it, but I do tend to get a lot of clients that are like in their early 20s or late teens. And so I like to provide this deck to them because they are coming to me seeking answers for some pretty heavy things. So it's nice to have something that is grounded in a system in which maybe they've seen before, which is the RWS, something that's traditional, but something that is kind of vibrant and matches the contemporary sense that many of them are looking for. You know, it makes tarot feel like it's accessible because it's not outdated. And so I've used this to help people through some of those larger transitions in their life, to help them see those areas that are still vital, that they can still be enthusiastic about. And I think in general, it just kind of matches that, the way that that age feels. So this was the JK Tarot. Beautiful, I love these colors. All right, next I have Sawyer's Path by Jamie Sawyer. This deck is out of print and I have edged mine. This deck feels very active to me because it is largely a deck full of portraits. So you can see this Knight of Pentacles here. He's very close in front of your face. This is the Page of Cups. And there's something about the images being drawn so close up that makes the querent feel very involved. There is that sense of action. It's almost kind of like a dare. Like, I dare you to do this. I dare you to give it a go. And it feels like that initial sense of like going on a journey. You know, I'm scared, I'm a little bit terrified, but like I see an end goal at sight. And that end goal is clearly depicted like by just how large everything is. This deck absolutely reminds me of like tattoo art as well. And as someone who is a huge fan of tattoos and the way that they push conventional boundaries, I think that that perfectly depicts the fire element in its willingness to break from traditional form, its willingness to embrace different types of media. Look how bright and beautiful it is. So this is Sawyer's Path by Jamie Sawyer. I don't see a lot of people talk about this one. I know it's been out of print for a while, but I don't know. I wonder if it was popular on TarotTube when it first came out, because I wasn't on TarotTube in 2021. But I think it's a cool deck. All right, next we have another one that's a bit quirky to represent that sense of unconventionality. That's going to be my Desert Illuminations. No doubt about this, that this is a fire deck. I think Lindsay Williams in general is just a very fiery person, and that is the name of the creator of this deck. Look how beautiful. I love those colors. And like how symbolic is that? I don't think I've ever noticed that the Nine of Cups has this rainbow down here at the bottom, but I think that is deeply, deeply symbolic and rich of the joy that one feels when they've reached that point of self-acceptance. So I don't think I've noticed that, but I had to go on that tangent because that's amazing. I think this is another deck that really makes tarot very accessible to people that are younger. You know, instead of being a deck that is intimidating, it's a deck that is fun. It's a deck that makes me laugh. It can still be quite a serious reader, but the fact that we have these aliens in here, I mean, come on, that's great. It also represents that sense of adventure that I look for in a fiery deck, because it's clearly here to take me on this adventure. And like, to be fair, like, aliens, if you are here, take me home. Like, that's how I feel. So I would say that this is rightfully so on my fire deck list. Here we go. All right, and then the last one I have is going to be the Supernova Tarot. Also a newer one in my collection. I've been getting a lot of newer fiery decks lately, which I personally think is very symbolic of some changes happening in my life. So I fucking love this deck. I let me look at the High Priestess. Like, you can't argue with her. This deck is very loud. This deck is very boisterous. This deck is very in your face. I think fire in general is very associated with self-expression. And I think that this deck is just a gorgeous group of people that are very self-expressionate. This reads a little bit more like a Queen of Wands in that kind of way. I love her. She's gorgeous. In the sense of like, this is exactly what I'm doing and I'm going to tell it to your face. And from like a interesting point of view, like, I think that this deck reminds me a lot of being at home. So when I lived in Alabama the 1 year that I was there, it very much felt like a Pentacles place. It was very grounded, and I miss the fieriness of Louisiana, the kind of quick action. People in Louisiana are fighters, and they are cussers, and they're in your face. And I really like that this deck shows that. There's a sense of movement and momentum, and a sense of just like wanting to be yourself that is really quite appropriate to the fire signs. And a sense of knowing oneself too. This is also a deck that I could see myself using for creativity and supporting through that process, just because it's slightly off the beaten path in a way that really makes me smile. So this was the Supernova Tarot, one of my fire decks. Alrighty guys, so those were all of my most fiery decks in my collection. I want to go ahead and thank y'all so much, and if you like this video, I am going to leave a link in the description box below so you can check out the other ones in this series. If you have any of these decks, I would love to know which ones you have and how you use them. I'm always looking for creative ways to play with my cards. So thank y'all so much, and I hope y'all have a beautiful day.